Hi, my name is Oren Franz. I'm not a medical professional of any kind. I just have a strong interest in psychology and neurology. Today we're going to talk about autism again. So what is autism spectrum disorder, or known as autism? Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disorder categorized by history of atypical sensory stimuli, communication delays, and restricted interest or repetitive behaviors. And, and then we're going to talk about why it's hard to differentiate autism spectrum disorder from schizotypal personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. What happens is that some symptoms of autism spectrum disorder comes from formal thought disorder. So I'll go to Wikipedia and search pervasive developmental disorder. I changed the meaning of pervasive developmental disorder. So, some symptoms of autism spectrum disorder includes paranoia, a characteristic from social anxiety, derealization, transient psychosis, and unconventional beliefs if environment or routine changed without notice. So, there is a delusion. Most autistic people have a delusion that the world revolves around them. They want the world to be in strict structure routine that doesn't even exist. It's not possible to have perfect routine. So when autistic person routine changed, they lash out and panic because they don't understand what's going on, and they're scared for their lives and feel like the world is going to end just because of one small routine changed without further notice. That's how delusional that is. Now, some symptoms of autism also includes mirror self-misidentification syndrome. So what happens is that when some autistic people look at themselves in the mirror, they see themselves as a child. They see someone else when they look in the mirror. And then there is maladaptive daydreaming. A lot of autistic people are prone to inner fantasy world. They can't connect to the world without having a lot of fantasies. It's also a form of thought disorder. And the third symptoms of autism including difficulty regulating behaviors and emotions, which may result in temper tantrums, anxiety, and aggression. Anxiety is also a form of thought disorder. That there's another symptom of autism. It includes delusional or unconventional perception of the world. So what that means is that autistic people, they don't see the world in a way that normal person sees. Some autistic people can see things that are not there and have some kind of hallucination or some kind of sensory issue that makes false perception of reality. Now let's look at pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. So, another symptom of pervasive developmental disorder is preoccupation with fantasies that interfere and that are not normal to have at a certain age, depending on social culture's role in religious norms. So what that means is that some autistic people have unusual fantasies. They have magical thinking. They have some kind of delusion of grandeur, or they believe that their imaginary friends are real, even though they're not. It's kind of like a delusion. Now, the real reason why it's hard to differentiate autism spectrum disorder from narcissistic personality disorder is because both symptoms of autism and narcissistic personalities include egomania symptoms. They're very similar to each other in some aspects of some symptomatology. Now I'm going to talk about dissociative identity disorder. My theory, my opinion is that dissociative identity disorder is a form of delusional disorder that causes you to think that you're someone else entirely. And that's why it may cause you to change your identity. You change your identity constantly. You forget who you are and you're in a fugue state. That's what my opinion is about dissociative identity disorder. I made a theory that narcissistic personality disorder is a form of mania, a form of bipolar disorder without any signs of depression that lasted for many, many, many decades. That's what I think of narcissistic personality disorder as, because when you have too much ego, you are manic already, even without depression. That's what I think about narcissistic personality disorder. I made a study that narcissistic personality disorder is a form of delusional disorder with some symptoms of antisocial personality disorder. And I will put the links into the description. Now, I made a theory that conduct and personality disorders include a little delusional state of mind. And I'll explain to you why that is. I'll put the links here. So, is narcissistic personality disorder similar to delusion of grandeur? Yes, I think it is. It includes delusional thinking. Let me pull the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder. From Wikipedia. So, having a grandiose sense of self is a form of delusion. Preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love is a form of delusion. Believing that you are special and unique and only can be understood by or associated with other special or high status people, it's a form of delusion. Because you believe that others are envious of them. You see, it's a delusion because it's very similar to the delusion of grandeur, because you believe that you are more powerful or have self-worth than anyone else. So, in symptoms of autism can also include grandiosity, because when you fixate on your restricted interest too much, you start to have false belief that you're better than everyone else based on your restricted interest and repetitive behaviors. There's an article that says why people with delusion of grandeur have overly inflated ego. There you go. From life hack. I will leave in the description below. Another real reason, I already explained many times, the real reason why it's hard to differentiate autism and narcissism from each other is because both of these disorders includes overly inflated ego. For narcissism, it's to be above than everyone else. And autistics' highly sense of superiority is being better than everyone else based on their restricted interest. Now, another reason why it's hard to differentiate autism spectrum disorder from schizotypal personality disorder is because both of these disorders include magical thinking. They're all formal thought disorders. I made a study that psychopaths and sociopaths have delusion that they can do whatever they want and have sense of worth, similar to narcissistic personality disorder. I'll leave that in the video in the description below. While symptoms of schizotypal personality disorder have traits associated with schizophrenia, some hallucinations, some unusual beliefs, kind of that stuff. And one symptom of delusion that is associated with psychopathy is psychopaths and sociopaths have delusion that committing crimes is fun, even though it's not fun at all. It's a very delusional way to think that way. Overly inflated ego is also a symptom of bipolar disorder. So narcissism, delusions of grandeur, they're all very similar, and even grandiosity are all very similar to bipolar disorder and autism. So, for a normal person, it's hard for the general public to differentiate narcissism, autism, schizotypal, and narcissistic personality apart from bipolar, because symptom of bipolar disorder also includes grandiosity and some symptoms of schizotypal personality disorder. I made a theory that autism spectrum disorder is a form of schizophrenia, a developmental form of schizophrenia that appears in early childhood and lasts throughout adulthood. Let me pull the statistics up. Mental health myths and facts. Okay, mental health myths and facts. Okay, there's a myth that people with mental health problems are violent and predictable. There's a myth that people with mental health problems are violent and unpredictable. Let's look at the facts. Fact. Column. According to the government, the vast majority of people with mental health problems are no more likely to be violent than anyone else. Most people with mental illness are not violent, and only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to individuals living with a serious mental illness. And they stated that, in fact, people with severe mental illnesses are over 10 times more likely to be victims of crime than the general population. So what they mean is that people with serious mental illnesses are more likely to be victims than the general population. Over 10 times more likely to be victims. They are 10 times more likely to be victims than the general population. And then I will look at the statistics. Psychosis and crime. So, according to the website, that relative risk of violence are increased in patients with psychotic disorders. However, the contribution of triggers or violent acts to this risk is uncertain. I will leave the description down below. Okay, so from design science participant, quote, using a sample of all individuals born in Sweden between 1958 and 1988, we identified patients in National Patient Register who were diagnosed with schizophrenia spectrum disorders. And 34,903 N equal 34,903, bipolar equal N 29,692, and as well as uninfected controls 27,63012. They then identified which sample persons had experienced any the following triggers for violent acts between January 1, 2001 and December 15, 2013. Exposure to violence, parental bereavement, self-harm, traumatic brain injuries, unintentional injuries, and substance intoxication. By using with individual models, we conducted conditional logistic regression to compare the high risk of individuals engaging in violent acts in the week following the exposure to a trigger with the risk of earlier periods of equivalent length. All environments founders were controlled by this research design. We further adjusted for time varying social demographic factors. Okay, this is interesting. Okay, so there's been a study that patients diagnosed with schizophrenia spectrum and bipolar disorders have higher risk of violent criminal convictions than do the general population. This is interesting. Previously, because they have comorbid substance use disorders. This is getting interesting. Okay, so psychosis has been associated with committing crimes. However, it has been reported that the association is mediated by toxin consumption, personality disorders, and positive symptoms. This study should determine relationships between psychological disorders and social demographic variables in violent crime perpetration of a sample of 472 men serving prison terms in Andalusia, Spain. Okay, this is interesting. Alright. Okay, this is interesting. Okay, so logistic regression analysis suggested that patients who experience command hallucinations to harm others were more than twice as likely to be violent, even when the analysis controlled for demographic variables, history of substance abuse, and social disparity responses biases. This is an interesting article. I'll post it in the video description. This gets interesting. Violence and schizophrenia. Interesting. Okay, patients in the violent group were significantly more likely to experience negative emotions, tone, content related to their voices than those in the non-violent group. This is interesting. Alright. Let me do a deep research. This is getting interesting. Okay. So, Most people with mental health and developmental disorders are 10 times more likely to be victims and are less likely to commit crimes than the general population. However, there are some psychiatric disorders that can cause people to do criminal activities, such as antisocial personality disorder, conduct disorders, paraphilic disorders, command hallucinations, and certain delusional disorders. For example, a person with prosecutory delusion may commit a crime because they're scared and paranoid that everyone is plotting against them, so they will lash out violently, or in rare cases, take someone's life because they're so scared. Delusion of grandeur or overly inflated ego, or egomania, megalomania, can cause a person to commit a crime because they think they are powerful than everyone else. And misidentification syndromes are delusional disorder that can cause you to believe that everyone you once knew is now an imposter, according to your delusions, which can cause you to commit a crime if you get very paranoid or scared. Other than that, most people with mental health and developmental disorders are 10 times more likely to be victims and are less likely to commit crimes than the general population. I hope you found my video informative and interesting. Thank you, and subscribe to my channel. If you like my channel, you can click the like button. Thank you. Goodbye.